Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the RotoWire Fantasy Football Show. My name is Jack Burkart. You can find me on Twitter at Jack Burkart, joined as usual by our NFL DFS captain of sorts, Ryan Belongi. We're here to break down the Week 13 DFS slate. I mean, Ryan, we're just coming off of a Thanksgiving slate, so maybe before we get into it, how did your Thanksgiving slate go overall, Ryan? I played some insane stuff in the mini max, and it didn't work out, believe it or not. But maybe you fared a bit better.
I broke about even. Thanks to CeeDee Lamb. I think he finished with like 4 points or something. Got hurt in the third quarter, never came back. Yeah, he was the most popular receiver. I kind of went all in on CeeDee Lamb, which hasn't worked out. I don't think all season. And it didn't work out again here, unfortunately. Tyreek Hill smashed at low ownership at the end to blow a bunch of my lineups out of the water. But there were some fun games. Our Packers won, so that was nice. Big Packers game next Thursday against the Lions. But yeah, no, good Thanksgiving overall. Some good food. Ready for this slate.
I am ready for this slate as well. Ryan, we may as well dive in. 10 games, which is still pretty good considering we have so many, I don't know how to say, non-weekend games going on. It's kind of a weird week in the NFL. So still a fairly large slate and a lot of interesting matchups. Ryan, I'll let you go through them, but the ones that stuck out to me, especially for tournaments, in the afternoon, we have the LA Rams. They're traveling to New Orleans. I think this might have the highest implied total of the entire slate with 51 total points. Ryan, I wrote up this game doing a little side work, and New Orleans has a terrible defense, and the Rams have been clicking on offense ever since Matthew Stafford now has the chance to throw to Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua. I'm really excited about targeting that game. I don't even care if it has ownership, Ryan. I just think it's not going to be high enough. But other exciting games, big total on Philadelphia, Baltimore. Tampa Bay, Carolina could be a little bit of fun too. Carolina can't stop anyone, but Tampa Bay is a bit of a pass funnel defense, and Carolina pieces are cheap, and we're going to be talking about them a little bit later on. Some interesting spots in the morning as well, but some games that are a little bit more boring. I think Pittsburgh, Cincinnati has a highest total. Ryan, what was jumping off the page when you were looking at these matchups?
Yeah, good breakdown. I had pretty similar thoughts. That Rams-Saints game looks like the best to me. I agree. 2 weeks ago, we targeted the Browns in that same environment. Jameis threw for 400, and Jerry Jeudy had like 150 yards and a touchdown or something. Elijah Moore went off. Like everyone went off. So yeah, Saints defense isn't good. Playing in a dome, which becomes better this time of year just because some of the other spots are colder and not as good for passing. And like you said, the passing game is really clicking. Puka's looked great. One of my favorite receivers this week. I think he'll be the favorite of quite a few people. And then, same total, same 51-point total on that Ravens Eagles game, which is definitely the marquee game of the slate, but probably not going to be very popular for DFS. I don't really see people spending up for Lamar or Hurts. We have 3 cheap quarterbacks that look pretty good, and people don't really spend up for QB anymore, especially in marginal spots or if there's other value. You mentioned the Bengals. Chase Brown's going to be crazy popular. Just a big misprice by DraftKings. 6,200. He's at least 1,000 too cheap. We'll talk about it at running back when we get to running back, but the matchup doesn't even matter. He's averaging like 27 touches over his last 3 games for 130 some yards per game. The Bengals offense has been so good. The feature back should be much more expensive. So I think Chase Brown will come in as the most popular player. The other game is the other game I like is the Chargers Falcons game. I think a lot of people will like that game too. Herbert, to me, Herbert's my favorite quarterback on the board, I think. Talk about it a little bit more when we get to the position, but he's been great this season. J.K. Dobbins is out, so I think they finally might lean into the pass here. And the Falcons are such a good matchup. The Falcons rank last in the league in sacks and last in the league in completion percentage allowed. So it should be a pretty comfortable day for Herbert. Yeah, so a lot of the same thoughts. I think we're going to end up with a slate that has a lot of chalk and a lot of people on the same stuff. So it'll be good for tournaments. It'll be easy to get leverage in tournaments. Cash games, you're going to be 1v1 and 2v2s. You're going to be sweating 2v2s in cash games most likely.
Yeah, Ryan, cash games, I'm just going to say it, they're going to be hell because the slate's a bit loose, I think, in terms of pricing. There's some players who are simply too cheap, and the calls are going to be really marginal. You're going to be choosing between good plays, and I just think that most of the field that's bothering to play cash in week 13 kind of has their heads screwed on mostly right. And whenever that's happening, I don't know, you're doing a lot of coin flipping overall. So I agree with that. Ryan, I was going to try to look at the RotoWire team pace and pass rate over expectation because I know there was a storyline with the Chargers earlier in the season that, Jim Harbaugh, he's going to be so boring. They're not going to throw whatsoever. You gave a great advertisement for the game environment overall. And I actually think lately the pass rate over expectation has been pretty good for the Chargers, at least. Yeah, I think, okay, so a little bit net negative over the season, but I think recently they've been chucking the ball a lot, Ryan. Is that impression true?
Yeah, that is true. Unfortunately, we can't filter it by, the last month or however long, but that data is nice. You can find it on RotoWire, all the pass rate over expectation stuff, some pace stuff. But yes, you're right. They started out the season, Greg Roman, offensive coordinator, really wanted to establish the run. They did for a while, started to open it up more. Lad McConkey's, really started to look good. Quentin Johnson had a few big games. He's coming off a bad game with a lot of drops. But just in general, Herbert's been great and consistent too. So it just makes sense. I think like 18 fantasy points in 5 straight games or something like that. The Herbert from past seasons was, kind of the opposite. They had really no running game with Eckler. And he was always, chucking it around, kind of the opposite of what it is now. So we know he's capable of that. And yeah, this is just the perfect matchup for it with Dobbins out.
Yeah, I agree overall. Ryan, I mean, the Pittsburgh-Cincinnati one is confusing me that game has a bit of a higher total. I think it maybe is just a function that Cincinnati has been in higher total games. Do you buy into this spot? Because when I think about these two teams playing, I'm thinking about a lot of flags and players fighting each other on the sidelines. This is an AFC North battle. It's just something where I didn't think it was going to be a spot where players were popping off the page. Yet here we are, especially with Chase Brown. So do you believe in this spot maybe for stacking, or what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I would say good question. And that came to my mind as well. And what it is the Bengals offense has just been too good. I think their offense ranks number 1 in the league since week 1. And it hasn't mattered the matchup. They absolutely torched the Ravens and the Chargers. And coming into those games, people were like, oh, the Chargers have a really good defense. The Ravens, good defense too. The Burrow and the offense have just been so good that so far the matchup hasn't mattered. So yeah, that was a bit curious, but it's just like it just kind of doesn't matter, I guess. The I don't know what I'm trying to say. The usage all goes to the same people as well, just like Chase Brown, Higgins, and Jamar Chase. So I don't know. It's understandable why they still project well, though. Like you're right, I never usually look at Steelers games and think, oh, I want to stack that game or I want to play a team against the Steelers. But I think with the Bengals, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I mean, if they're pushing games, that's a fantasy goldmine. I don't think there's much more to say beyond that. Ryan, let's just I think we'll pick up more storylines as we talk through the players. So let's dive into good quarterback plays. Just thinking from cash games, I think people are going to be spending in the mid 5Ks. That's just where all the value is. Justin Herbert looks like one of the best values on the board overall. Anthony Richardson is always an option, though I'm not a real big fan of the matchup at New England. Just a game that I think might play a little bit slowly. Another game that I think might play a little slowly in terms of pace is Arizona at Minnesota. Now, that's an indoor game, and maybe we get excited about Kyler, who has some rushing upside. But Ryan, I'm not really into Kyler Murray. He has not been rushing that much over the past month. And he did uncork like 37 pass attempts last week against Seattle. But I think Arizona are like bottom 5 in the league in passing attempts per game. And they also play slow. They play a lot of 2 tight end sets. I know way too much about the Cardinals, Ryan, the NFC West thought leader over here. Which is all to say is I kind of like Justin Herbert. I feel like it just seems like the coziest spot to click. Even if guys nearby are going to project similarly, I mean, I think we've made the case already. Like they pass a lot and it's a good defensive matchup. Tell me your thoughts on the quarterback position.
Yeah. I think it's kind of a no-brainer. Just by the numbers, it's the best matchup a quarterback can have. Mentioned the Falcons last in the league in sacks, and last in the league in completion percentage allowed. That's what you want. 5,600 too cheap. You should be over 6K for a spot like this. I think the other 2 guys, you could consider would be Richardson, like you said, for 100 cheaper. He was massive chalk last week, over 50% in a lot of stuff for the same price against the Lions. It's basically the opposite matchup, like you said. It's probably going to be slow and a bit different, or but the Colts should end up in better spots a lot more often than they did against the Lions, who the Lions just had the ball all game, scoring every possession. Up against Drake May, you're going to have 3 and outs from the Patriots, short fields for the Colts. So there'll be more opportunities for touchdowns for Anthony Richardson. So I think he's a good tournament play. He can run to win. I've seen him do that a couple times. And then the other cheap quarterback, Matthew Stafford, looks good for 5,800. Going to be more of a tournament play just because he doesn't do anything with his legs. But he's been throwing for a ton of yards since Puka and Kupp are both healthy together. And they've been passing a ton since those 2 came back a month ago. So yeah, I'm going to be living in that cheap range. Herbert and Stafford, probably my favorites. I don't know what I'm going to do with Richardson. I don't mind taking a shot on Richardson though, because you might have, I think you have Josh Downs out. I think Josh Downs is out. So, you might be able to take a shot on a cheap Adonai Mitchell, or even Michael Pittman's cheap if you want to go that route. So I think Richardson's in play for tournaments.
I agree, especially when you make the case for a couple rushing touchdowns. I mean, if Anthony Richardson gets 2 short fields and 2 rushing touchdowns, how does he score under 20 points at this price, right? And then you can afford all the good plays around him. I want to co-sign Matthew Stafford. Really slow start to the season for him, but I think he's averaging just over 2 touchdowns per game since Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua are back. And talk about a team, Ryan, where we know where the ball is going to go. Matthew Stafford is going to throw it to Puka and Cooper Kupp. I mean, maybe a couple targets are going to go to Demarcus Robinson in the red zone. That could cause some amount of frustration. I'm willing to eat that risk because you have a really concentrated attack overall. I think Stafford is a great shout. So I'm gonna co-sign that one. Any love for the more expensive options? I mean, I think it's pretty achievable to play the expensive quarterbacks. Not many people are. You have guys with rushing upside like Lamar Jackson and Jalen Hurts up there. It hasn't been getting it done on DraftKings, Ryan, but do you think maybe it'll just be different in week 13?
Well, it might be, but I'm not going to take the chance here. I in my article, I highlighted both Jackson and Hurts as fades. I realized, I wrote it before I checked ownership. I see that they're not going to be very popular, but anyways, the reason being is, both have added big pieces in Derrick Henry and Saquon Barkley, and it just affects the ceiling so much. Both Henry and Barkley are kind of doing the same thing. They're eating up a ton of yards. They're scoring at least a touchdown a game. And when you're priced at 8K, you need all the touchdowns and yards you can get. So yeah, and I also think this matchup is, while it could be back and forth, obviously it has a high total, two good teams, but the total is always going to be that way with teams like this. I think either of these teams would want to get a lead and run the ball. So I think it's possible that it could go back and forth, but you might have Devontae Smith out again, and I don't know, Jack. I don't like the value all that much either to get up to these quarterbacks, and I'm definitely content with Herbert and Stafford. So it just really doesn't make sense. If I was going to do it, I think it's a better spot for Jaden Daniels. He's cheaper, and it should be a bounce back spot against the Titans after bad performance against the Cowboys a week ago. So I think Daniels could give you the same as Lamar or Hurts. So I'd probably rather just do that. I mean, you even have or you can play Burrow even too for like 1,000 cheaper. Probably avoid those top two guys.
Good shouts all around, Ryan. I have two quarterbacks, strictly tournaments. Quite possibly terrible ideas. So, Ryan, don't hold back the feedback if this is too disgusting. I have our pass rate over expectation chart up. The Seattle Seahawks pop off on this. And we have a revenge game, Ryan. Geno Smith, 5,500. They're a team that under Ryan Grubb passes a ton. I don't know the injury situation exactly right now with DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, but you might have a slightly condensed target tree if one of them is out. And Jackson Smith and Jigba has been really good, getting a lot of targets. Just the revenge game was on my mind, but I don't know. I feel like Geno Smith has underperformed in touchdowns this season with the amount that he's been throwing. It's been a little bit sloppy with interceptions too. So I'm at least interested in that, especially with this New York Jets team that's basically capitulated on the season. This could be a disaster, Ryan. So just one maybe big GPP angle I'm thinking about. And then this is going to be gross, but Bryce Young is only 4,700. And that extra 1,000 can get you a couple players that you want. If you believe that Bryce Young might be able to put in a competent shift and score, 16 to 20 points, that might be pretty good, Ryan, on a 10-game slate. I've suggested some pretty terrible quarterback plays. Our friend Mo Hendy is he's screaming at me right now for this suggestion, but Bryce Young projects okay, and I do like the matchup. That game could be fast as well. What do you think of Geno Smith and Bryce Young as sort of gross quarterback plays?
I really like one of those shouts, and it's actually Bryce Young. Yeah, 4,700, played pretty well against the Chiefs last week, almost beat them. Bucks are a matchup I always like to target for quarterbacks, and yeah, really condensed target tree on Carolina. You have Deontay Johnson traded, Jonathan Mingo traded, Jalen Coker out. Thielen came back last week and played about 2/3 of the snaps. And then you're going to have Leggett and David Moore playing about 90+% of the snaps at good price tags. David Moore is going to be popular. We'll talk about that. But yeah, I like Bryce Young. I think the Geno Smith shout is great on paper. I've seen that game might have the most questionable weather of all the games. I think it's going to be cold, windy, big gusts. That's all, it's tough on a Friday. You never say anything definitive about weather on Friday. But it's in general a good shout. He's cheap. Geno's been playing well, and the Jets have been bad. The Jets are also going to be one of the chalkier defenses all the way down to 2,500.
I'm just pulling up the practice reports, Ryan. This is another great tool on RotoWire, rotowire.com/pod for all your statistical research needs. It looks like Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf did manage to get a full practice in. So that's a good sign that they'll be at full strength at wide receiver. Tyler Lockett not really playing a big part. Ryan, I'm suggesting plays that are kind of way off the board. So maybe we don't need to spend too much of our valuable time on this.
I think, Jack, rather than like stacking or playing a QB wide receiver combo, it'd probably be better to just play a one-off, like a DK Metcalf or Smith and Jigba. You're going to get guys on this slate that are going to be like 1% owned, 2-3% owned with all the chalk. That's a spot people aren't going to be on.
Yeah, and well, I'll talk more about the Seahawks, but like Smith and Jigba getting a ton of really close area targets. He has a really good floor, and he has ceilings in games where he can just rack up a bunch of targets. The risk is that, Geno's efficient downfield and connects with DK Metcalf. But yeah, both are good one-offs, I think, in larger field tournaments. So I'll make sure I get them in my pool. Hopefully goes better than Thanksgiving Day. Any other quarterbacks, Ryan?
Yeah, I mean, there are guys you could take a chance on. Like you mentioned Kyler, so we'll at least touch on him. Um, Not for me for the reasons you said. Just like they play slow, but this is a matchup that could bring them out of it against a Vikings team that blitzes a ton. So it should be a decent spot for Kyler to succeed. He hasn't had to run, but might have to against a blitz here. So I don't necessarily mind Kyler. On the other side of I don't know, the other two, Baker Mayfield and CJ Stroud. Baker Mayfield against Carolina, guy's just been incredible. He hasn't done it as much lately, but he was close last week again. They just had 3 rushing touchdowns instead of Baker getting them. And now he's got Evans back. So, I mean, some of the recent game logs don't look as good because he didn't have Evans. But this is a great spot against Carolina. And then CJ Stroud, you know, it's been a while since Stroud had a good game. We talked about it on the podcast last week. But this is a good spot against Jacksonville. Nice weather. Good spot for Nico Collins. And there's some good run backs on the Jags side. So just a guy that, it's going to be like 2%. You never know.
Well, all I know is that if I play him, make sure that you fire up Joe Mixon in that spot if I play CJ Stroud. Good shouts all around at quarterback, Ryan. Let's get a word from one of our sponsors, Circa Sports. The end of the season is getting closer. Catch the big game poolside at Stadium Swim at Circa Resort and Casino in Las Vegas. 6 temperature-controlled pools, a massive 143-foot screen, and booming game sound. Plus, view the pyrotechnics and visual effects throughout the game. Grab the best seat in the sun with day beds, poolside boxes, cabanas, and more. Stadium Swim's big game viewing party is February 9th only at Circa Resort and Casino. Space is going fast. Reserve your spot today at circalasvegas.com. Ryan, let's pivot right into the running back position. You mentioned Chase Brown. He is underpriced, a player who's getting just about all of the backfield work, both in the running game and the passing game. He's going to be a fantastic play overall. And then there's some good spend-up options at the position. I think Bijan Robinson is someone who's always projecting quite well. That's one name that stuck out to me. Kyren Williams is going to look really good in a high total matchup. It's been a while since Kyren Williams has scored touchdowns, Ryan, but you know what he's capable of, and he usually gets 90% of the snaps. Blake Corum only gets like 1 drive scripted to him a game, and otherwise it's the Kyren Williams show. And then I think a player who's going to be big chalk, Alvin Kamara, is going to look good. I mean, we talked about how New Orleans doesn't have the best defense. Neither do the Rams, and that game could be back and forth, someone who's going to get a ton of work. Ryan, what's your breakdown of the running back position?
Yeah, good breakdown. You nailed it. For cash games, I think it's about as straightforward as we've ever seen. You can start with Kamara and Chase Brown. With Kamara, the usage he's getting is Christian McCaffrey in recent years is really the only guy we've seen that has usage like this. I mean, on the season, he's averaging over 5 catches on the season. And the Saints are still without Olave, Shaheed, all their receivers, basically. So yeah, it's just going to continue to be high usage for Kamara. A lot of catches. He should be like 8,500, you would think, in this spot. So yeah, he projects as the best value. He projects for the most raw points. It's a good matchup, like you said. Seems like a no-brainer. Same with Chase Brown, just way too cheap. It's unfortunate we don't have a decision. Chase Brown should be like 7,200. For sure. He should be the same as Kyren Williams. He projects the same, if not better than Kyren Williams. 27 touches in his per game in his last 3. And he's also just really good. He's a guy you always like to roster. Catches passes, explosive. With Kyren's going to be the fade for me this week. I see him projecting well. He'll get some ownership. I understand it. It's a great spot. It makes sense. What I'll say is he has 0 catches in the last 2 games and 0 targets in the last 2 games. And that for sure coincides with Puka and Kupp being healthy. So I'm not going to try to rely on 100+ yards and a touchdown or 2, because I think you're going to need that. You're going to need 100 yards, the bonus, You're going to need him to get in the end zone. I mean, of course he can do that. It's a great spot, and like the Saints are bad, so it's a multiple touchdown upside spot. But I'll fade it. I prefer Bijan. I think Bijan would be the next guy I would go to. We just saw Derrick Henry have a lot of success against the Chargers, and just sort of makes sense because I'm going to be on Herbert. And I also like to target running backs against like passing teams. I think the Chargers might be more of a passing team here. Usually what happens is, you're not getting as many handoffs, so the clock's not running as much. You might have more incomplete passes on one side, shorter drives, just more possessions. Bijan's been great up until the Falcons laid an egg against the Broncos last time out. But before that, I think he was over 22 fantasy points in like 5 straight games or something, catching passes. Falcons are off a bye too, so kind of like that, off a bye at home. So Bijan, yeah, he'd be the third guy that I like.
Ryan, I know there was a usage storyline, and it might have been the week before the bye or 1 week before. It involves Bijan. He's been spending a lot of time splitting work with Tyler Algier. And I think it was this game against the Broncos where Tyler Algier just didn't see any work out of nowhere. And it was difficult for people to parse the tea leaves on that one because it was kind of a weird game where Atlanta basically just quit halfway through against the Broncos in that spot. Do you think that that's going to be sticky? I personally don't. I think Algier's a decent player, and I'm not willing to over extrapolate based on one weird game where they were massive underdogs. Are you concerned about Bijan Robinson's workload?
A little bit of both. The week before that, Algier got stuffed at the goal line twice and something else too. And it just sort of seemed like, okay, like what are we doing here? They gave it to Bijan the next play and he scored. So no, I don't worry about it too much. A little, right? But Bijan catches enough passes where I don't necessarily worry about it.
Yeah, fair enough. The passing game role is super valuable overall. Ryan, I have Chase Brown's game logs up, and the target count is absolutely ridiculous. Week 10 at Baltimore, he had 11 targets. Week 7 at the Chargers, he had 7 targets, and he is coming off a bye. Just a guy who was, touted before the season for his pass catching ability, and now he's getting the red zone touches too. 13 red zone touches in his last 3 appearances.
Yeah, great to bring that up, and that should be sticky. Like the Bengals are not really a running team. I mean, they try, but I think the Bengals have been leading the league in pass rate over expectation for the most part. They're always high up there. They're a pass first team. So Chase Brown's going to be involved. He's going to get dump offs. And then in this spot, you got TJ Watt on the other side. Chase Brown, perfect for that. Some quicker stuff. Burrow gets in trouble, dumps it down. So, yeah, he just has so many ways to get there.
Yeah, and if you want to play a more contrarian style, and I like to play more contrarian style in NFL, and then complain to Ryan in DM afterwards about how unlucky I am that I took the high variance approach. I just feel like Chase Brown, there's so many spots you can get different in NFL DFS, Ryan. Chase Brown, at his price, given his workload, that's what we call good chalk. I mean, Chase Brown doesn't know that he's chalk, but the workload is so secure and he's so cheap. I just don't really see like where I want to poke around as an alternative.
It's great that these guys don't know their chalk, by the way. I think of that too sometimes.
I know that's what our friend Jordan Cooper, who does the soccer show, he's like, they don't know their chalk. I'm like, okay, well.
You got to remind yourself sometimes. But yeah, no, Jack, I agree. He's just way underpriced.
Let's look at some other names that seem a little bit interesting, at least to me. Ryan, I think Chuba Hubbard is interesting at 6,700. Jonathan Brooks came back last week, but he only played like 6 or 5 snaps. Some really reduced workload. So you're going to project a slightly worse workload for Chuba Hubbard, but he's been fantastic. I mean, he's earned his contract extension, I think, even if it feels a little bit weird with the drafting of Jonathan Brooks. I'm just concerned that Tampa Bay is a pass funnel, but that's something that you can that's a tournament play that's worth considering just because he is a little bit cheaper overall. You can play either of Tampa Bay's running backs. Carolina are just a total sieve when it comes to running backs. Bucky Irving is a player I like more because I'm a Rashad White hater, but Ryan, you could tell me either way. I think either of those guys is a good savings option and a good tournament option. Either could come out with 2 touchdowns. That's all we're asking for at the running back position. Who do you like in tournaments, Ryan?
Yeah, I love Bucky, first of all. Played a bunch last week. He looked great. Salary increased by 500. Not worried too much about that. Great spot against Carolina. So yeah, I really like Bucky for tournaments. I think you could play Chuba too. Like you said, you don't normally think of Tampa Bay as a team you want to play running backs against because they are good at stopping the run, but they've still been a good matchup for running backs. They still allowed big plays to running backs and some big runs and some catches to running backs. So yeah, I don't mind Chuba. My running back pool is going to be pretty tight this week. I would imagine that I'll have Kamara or Chase Brown on every single lineup. Bijan will be mixed in there. I'm planning to get different at other spots. I'm going to look to Bucky as the cheap guy. So I don't know, Jack. I haven't really dug into these other backs too much because the chalk spots are just so good here. And this feels like one of those weeks we've had a few in NFL DFS this year where you sort of just bookend your lineups with the 3 best running backs and they all score you 20 plus fantasy points and then you just go from there.
Yeah, the routes to failure just seem super thin because sometimes you can get the fade right, Ryan, but then you have to replace it by a player who does well or just hope that some total collapse happens. And you can do that. That happens. Sometimes we get really low scoring slates, Ryan, but
yeah,
that's not for the faint of heart.
No, even like Alvin Kamara, for example, he was massive chalk the last 2 slates too. Great spots. He was more expensive there and still massive chalk, but failed because he didn't score a touchdown either of the last 2. I mean, he dropped what would have been like a 80-yard touchdown against the Falcons, but Kamara ended up being a losing play the last couple of weeks. So there are other running backs in decent spots. I think you can fade some of the chalk, but not all of it.
Good points all around, Ryan. Any final takes at the running back position that you want to get to the people?
I was just looking if there was any other cheap. Oh yeah, there is. Gus Edwards. He's only 4,300. We talked about Herbert. Love the passing game in this spot. But Gus Edwards is probably going to get the bulk of the work with Dobbins out. The reason he's not going to be chalk, though, is because you don't know about his workload. They have Haskins there. They have Kamani Vidal there. But Gus Edwards is 4,300. So there's a world where he scores, 2 short touchdowns. And there's also another world where he runs for 100 yards. If he busts off a long one, he could end up with 16 carries or something and have a good game. So Gus Edwards is in play.
Well, that would take my best ball teams from 7th place to 5th place if I got a good old Gus Edwards game. Good shout, Ryan. That's a good old-fashioned leverage play off of a chalky Justin Herbert, though I don't know how many people are going to attack that passing game. He will be popular, though, just because he's going to be a popular cash quarterback. I like that shout. Before we get into wide receiver, another word from our sponsor, Live Golf. A new season of Live Golf Fantasy is coming in 2025. New prizes, new ways to win, and more are coming in the new season. Get ready to play and sign up now at fantasy.livegolf.com. Ryan, what are you thinking about doing at the wide receiver position? In tournaments, I'm definitely going to be playing some Cooper Kupp. I'm definitely going to be playing some Puka Nacua. Both have been getting a ton of targets, though Puka's getting slightly more. But there's some players who are a little bit cheaper that I think you can look towards at the wide receiver position. Drake London always projects well. We know that. We've done that joke before. T. Higgins is going to look like a good option at 6,600. Cheap Carolina pass catchers in a pass funnel situation. You got David Moore at 3,500, the salary relief we kind of need. And you got Adam Thielen at 48. Ryan, as I'm talking through this slate, I'm like, some of these guys should be a little bit more expensive. Like Puka Nacua at 7,600, he could be 8,100, and I think that would be justified. So for that reason, I'm saying, the pricing is soft. There's just not that much value, and so people are going to be playing a lot of David Moore. He's going to be a pretty popular option to stir the proverbial drink in your lineups. What do you think is optimal from a cash game point of view? I think this is going to be very hard to nail down.
Yeah, perfect breakdown, actually. David Moore, 10 targets last week. He's going to be where people go for salary relief, playing 90+% of snaps and a good matchup. Kind of just checks every box. Think it's a great fade for tournaments because he will be the most popular in the 3K range. But I'm comfortable going there for cash games. It kind of just makes everything work. You can definitely then play, I think T. Higgins will be popular at 6,600. He crushed last time out against the Chargers. Over 30 fantasy points. He's got another big game, 30 against the Ravens. Look in the Bengals' two toughest matchups, T. Higgins has went for 30. And he's looked great this year. He's looked better than he's ever looked. Now he's done the T. Higgins thing where he's missed time with weird injuries here and there, but when he's out there, he looks so good. Like T. Higgins for cash games. Love Puka Nacua, like you said. I'd be fine going to Puka in cash games too if you can get there. I'm not sure what ends up happening with him. It depends what you do in the flex. It depends if you want like a Bijan Robinson or a spend up running back, then you might not be able to get to Puka, or you'd have to fade T. Higgins. But I love Puka. He's only played 55% of the snaps the last 3 weeks, and it doesn't matter at all. I think I've caught all 3 of those Rams games, and he goes off the field a lot for most of their running plays. After he makes big catches, he takes a rest. But when he's out there, Stafford looks his way first every single time. I mean, and yeah, he's as good running after the catch with the ball as any receiver. I mean, he's been looking a little bit like Nico Collins and AJ Brown type these last few games. So yeah, big spot for Puka, I think. Highlighted him in my article as the expensive option, Jack. So yeah, I'm in on that.
I'm absolutely in as well. I'm not worried when Puka goes off the field. It's happening on running plays, like you mentioned. His routes run numbers, again, I'm the NFC West thought leader here. His routes run numbers are always, just a dash below Cooper Kupp. He's running most of the snaps. And even if he wasn't, Ryan, it doesn't matter. Like you said, he's Stafford's first read on so many of these plays overall. I don't know, just the total package. He's a great player. I don't think we have to sell the viewers on that. Ryan, I'm a bit of a T. Higgins hater, and I know he's looked really good, but he's just a player, like an outside X receiver. He's had so many frustrating games. I have a tough time playing him when he's chalk.
Well, Jack,
it doesn't feel like
good chalk. That. Yeah, no, I think Higgins is a great fade for tournaments. Of course, you can play him too, but if he's going to be 30%, yeah, absolutely. Everything you said. He could bust or he could just score like 12 points. But also, his teammate, Jamar Chase, is going to be like 5%. And, I mean, we saw Chase go for 58 against the Ravens 2 weeks ago, 26 against the Chargers. I mean, no one puts up more ceilings than Chase. He goes over 30 all the time. Impossible to guard, impossible to tackle. And, yeah, just because he's all the way up to 8,600, look, you're going to get T. Higgins at like 25% owned, and Jamar Chase is going to be like 5. So that's a leverage option for tournaments. I think Nico Collins too. I was on Nico Collins last week. A lot of people were. This is pretty much the same spot. He's a little more expensive now. But it's different because he stood out as the best play last week. And this week you have Kupp and Nacua there. You also have Chase and Higgins sandwiching him. So, yeah, I don't think people are really going to play Nico Collins. That's a good tournament play. And I like Mike Evans. I like Mike Evans as a sort of a pivot off Higgins for the same price. I'm probably not going to do George Pickens, but George Pickens makes a lot of sense if you're playing multiple, or if you're playing large field GPPs. What do you think, Jack?
George Pickens is like the classic bring back option. I don't like to force it, but it actually makes sense in this case. You have Russell Wilson, a quarterback who throws a good deep ball. George Pickens can make a living off of those deep balls, and we want the pace of that game to improve. So feels like a spot where everyone projects fine, so you may as well embrace the correlation. Ryan, I've made so many mistakes like making these gigabrain stacks of like guys that don't even project well. If they all seem like good plays and they correlate, then I think you can always go for it. Right, I'm a little bit stuck about what I want to do at the mid-range at wide receiver. So I think maybe it might be a popular approach if in cash games you don't play Bijan Robinson. All right, then you can afford Puka Nacua, and then T. Higgins. I think he's just going to be popular, and then you'll play David Moore. So you've kind of avoided this issue. But maybe that's a case against playing Bijan and chalk. There's a lot of interesting plays for tournaments, 5,000 and 6,000, but no one really pops off the page. What do you think about this range? I think it's more full of tournament plays than cash plays.
Couple guys I like. First one I really like is Brian Thomas for 5,500. Trevor Lawrence is going to be back. Well, that's what it depends on. I would never play him without Trevor Lawrence. But Trevor Lawrence is going to be back, barring any kind of something unforeseen. And Gabe Davis is out. Christian Kirk is out. I mean, Thomas is too cheap here. I think Calvin Ridley just torched. Calvin Ridley and Will Levis just torched the Texans defense last week. So yeah, I like Brian Thomas. I'll be playing him in tournaments. I like Ladd McConkey for 61. If you're going to play Herbert, that makes a ton of sense. I like Calvin Ridley, who we just talked about. Levis has been much better recently. And Ridley's his top target. Been catching deep balls. He's been close to putting up bigger scores. Got tackled at the one last week, and just missed another deep ball. So I think Ridley's okay. And then the Carolina guys are okay too. Moore is going to be chalk. I don't mind going to Leggett for 51. Upside in this spot, and Thielen too. If you're a Thielen guy, he could do it here. He caught 3 for 57 last week in his first game back. Might have one more big game in him. And then even Quentin Johnson, I'll mention, kind of an embarrassing game for Quentin Johnson last week. 0 catches on 5 targets, 3 drops. But he's had some big games this season, and up until this last game, he had actually looked better. Couple games where he looked unguardable. I mean, there's a reason why he's a first-round draft pick, because of the physical qualities he has, and he's really their only deep threat. I mean, McConkey, more stuff underneath, over the middle. Even Josh Palmer's like a possession guy. Will Dissly too doesn't offer upside. So Quentin Johnson is still the home run threat. He's going to be 1% owned. Everyone will play McConkey if they're playing Herbert. Worth mentioning.
I think good shouts all around, Ryan. I was doing some scrolling when you said that because I was looking for some cheap wide receivers with some sort of pulse. Demarcus Robinson, I wasn't sure if he was going to be suspended for this game. He was arrested on suspicion for committing a DUI, but Sean McVay said he would be active. He's only 4,000, Ryan. And Demarcus Robinson is a big body guy. He gets targeted a high ADOT, sometimes gets used in the red zone, and he does have a multiple touchdown game in him this season. If we're going to be playing some kind of gross plays like David Moore, you can consider Demarcus Robinson, especially in a lineup where you're not playing any other Rams players. I don't think I'm going to make a lineup that would be like Stafford, Demarcus Robinson, and Puka Nacua, because I think Robinson is just going to end up with a touchdown, and that would take away from Puka Nacua in that type of spot. So if you just want a weird one-off, I don't hate it in the largest of fields. It is a little bit thin though. He's not going to get a ton of targets or hit the ball.
Yeah. I think it's a fine way for a Stafford double too, though. I mean, if you're playing Stafford because he doesn't run, you want him to throw for 4 touchdowns. And really, Puka only really, Puka only needs 1 touchdown to be optimal in a lot of cases. I mean, you'd like him to have 2, but 6 catches for 140 yards and a touchdown is going to be optimal quite a bit too. So I don't mind it with doubles. Some other cheap guys, I would take a chance on Adonai Mitchell if you're playing Richardson, just because it's finally an opportunity now with Downs out, and even Alec Pierce might be out too. So if you're ever going to take a chance on Mitchell, I think it should be here. And then Noah Brown had 10 targets against the Cowboys last week. He's had other games with 8, 7. He's an interesting way to play Jaden Daniels. You don't have to play Daniels either. But worth mentioning. Some people might say, like, how do you not mention MVS? I guess I will. He's had these.
We don't have to do that.
2 massive games in a row. Led the Saints in routes run. Unfortunately, yeah, I'm not going to do it. But yeah, he's hit a couple home runs recently. But the price tag is kind of up there now. They have another guy who was it? Kevin Austin led them in snaps last week or last time out in MVS and routes run. I don't know. I'm not going there with the Saints.
I think that makes sense. Ryan, one cheap name that I uncovered, he's popular in a lot of my dynasty leagues randomly. Calvin Austin on Pittsburgh, only 3,300. If you're going to play Jamar Chase, you're going to need a cheap wide receiver. I think he's more of a deep threat, someone who can pace up a game. Ryan, does Calvin Austin have a pulse in large field tournaments at 3,300?
Yeah, that's not a bad shout. I mean, he's a guy that scores long touchdowns. He's been doing it a few times this season. Yeah, I don't mind that. I mean, you just need to beat David Moore.
Basically, and you need a cheap wide receiver to be optimal. But if he can get 12 DraftKings points and then the expensive running backs do well, I don't know. I can see it. I can see how it could work out.
Yeah, the other guys at that price that I should mention, Kendrick Bourne, and we mentioned the last couple of weeks, Kayshon Boutte, 3,500, 3,400. Demario Douglas is questionable. But even if Douglas plays, I mean, saw Bourne do it 2 weeks ago. At least 5 targets in 3 straight. And then Boutte, I mean, he was a cash game play a couple of weeks ago. 6 targets in 4 straight games. There are worse plays.
Yeah. I think it sounds like there are some names that we can click in tournaments. Ryan, any last words on the wide receiver position?
No, I don't think so.
All right, well, let's take a quick break then for our friend Nick Whalen to tell you a little bit about DraftKings Pick 6.
We're proud to be brought to you by DraftKings Pick 6. So many NFL offerings each week over at Pick 6. Been enjoying playing on the Pick 6 platform each and every week of the NFL season. Think a certain quarterback will throw for more than 300 yards. How about your favorite receiver scoring a touchdown? Check out Pick 6, the newest way to play fantasy football and win cash right now with DraftKings. Here's how it works. Just pick 2 to 6 players of the same sport and choose if they'll have more or less of a given stat. Yards, catches, touchdowns, etc. Lock in those picks and compete against opponents for a shot at huge cash prizes. Download the new DraftKings Pick 6 app now and use our code ROTOPICK. That's ROTOPICK. Again, ROTOPICK, ROTOPICK. If you're a new Pick 6 customer, play $5, get $50 in Pick 6 credits guaranteed. Just use that code, ROTOPICK. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-78-89-7777 or visit ccpg.org in Connecticut. Must be 18 plus. Age and eligibility restrictions vary by jurisdiction. Pick 6 not available everywhere, including New York and Ontario. Void where prohibited. See terms at pick6.draftkings.com/promos.
All right, Ryan, we're going to dig into the tight end position, and I need you to close your eyes and just imagine a tight end who can catch 8 balls, get targeted 10 times, and then get 7 carries for 140 yards in a single game. Ryan, I play in some 2 tight end leagues, and I collected Taysom. I've held on to him for years because he has this nuclear upside. And Ryan, I think the coaching staff says that they want to keep on giving Taysom Hill more work, especially given all of the injuries. Taysom Hill is 5,000, Ryan, and he might be a cash play on DraftKings.com. Tell me what you think about the tight end position. You have to start with Taysom Hill because that's where the slate that's the main decision.
Yeah, what a world. 5K Taysom Hill, now a cash option. And yeah, I would agree. We've been talking about him on here too, been playing him. How can you not like him here? After that stat line you just said, 8 catches on 10 targets, along with the rushing upside that he offers. And this is the game environment we want too. 50-point total. We just saw Saquon Barkley run absolutely wild on these Rams less than a week ago. So yeah, it all lines up. I'm definitely considering Taysom in cash games. I think clearly him and Evan Ingram are the best 2 options. Evan Ingram with Trevor Lawrence back. Same thing I said about Gabe Davis. About Brian Thomas. You've got Christian Kirk out. No Gabe Davis, and Trevor Lawrence loves targeting Evan Ingram. His price tag is down, after playing with Mac Jones for the last however many games. So yeah, I think Taysom and Evan Ingram, the top 2 options. After that, you could look to Hawkinson and Goddard at 44 and 43 right next to each other. Goddard, though, is dependent on Devonta Smith, who is actually like the only real significant piece of injury news on the slate right now. He seems to be a true game time decision. Said like it might not even be up to him or something. But that's the reason why Goddard's popping right now, is because no Devonta Smith. I wouldn't even consider him if Smith played. As far as Hawkinson goes, yeah, that was a great game from Hawkinson last week. Looked fully healthy. I think you can go there, but I'd be pretty worried that they go back to Jefferson in this spot. I think it was clearly the game plan to use Jefferson as a decoy. Jalen Johnson on the Bears is like the biggest shutdown corner in the league at this point. So yeah, they just fed Hawk and Jordan Addison. You saw Addison do it too. Not that I don't like Hawkinson though. Hawkinson, great player and like cheap price tag. So you can go there, but I just don't think I do it in cash games. I think that more of a tournament play. For cash, I would want to get up to Taysom or Evan Ingram.
Yeah, Ryan, I'm not a defensive coordinator. I'm just a humble math professor. And I think, great, the Bears, great defense. They stopped Justin Jefferson. And I think the game plan was, well, if we can take away Jefferson, we can make Sam Darnold make mistakes. Hawkinson and Addison, they're good players, but maybe not difference-making players. And that backfired completely. It seemed like the Vikings were completely content. I mean, they want to throw to Justin Jefferson, but if you take him away and you give opportunities to Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson, even Aaron Jones, all 3 were incredibly productive. So I just can't imagine being the defensive coordinator or Jonathan Gannon and being like, well, let's try it again. Maybe it'll be different this time. It's like that Arrested Development meme. So yeah, it makes me a little bit more bearish on TJ Hawkinson, but we still had 3 guys get there. So, maybe a couple players from Minnesota can get there, even though I don't really love the game environment. Ryan, is Will Dissly still a good play? I know that he was a big waiver wire ad discussion, only cost 4,000. Someone cheap that you can throw in with Justin Herbert stacks. You interested in Will Dissly?
Yeah, I think this is the most interested in Will Dissly I've ever been. Herbert clearly likes throwing to him. He's been consistently involved like all season now. And Hayden Hurst is going to miss another game. So he's got like pretty much no competition. And yeah, I think he sees a few more targets here with less of a running game. So I do like Dissly for tournaments. I don't know that I'm going to look cheaper, but a couple of guys to mention. We've talked about Carolina. If you want, Tommy Tremble is 2,800 because you have Tavian Sanders out after that neck injury last week. So, it's not the worst if you want a punt. The other punt would be Juwan Johnson as leverage off of Taysom Hill. Juwan Johnson's only 3,100, and I think he has like 3 catches in 5 straight games, or sorry, 3 catch, at least 3 catches in 6 of the last 7. I mean, that's not bad. Now they have, or they still have no wide receivers. So it's possible to pay off that price tag for 3,100, and you just get big leverage off of Taysom and or Kamara. But that being said, I want to get up to those 5K tight ends.
I mean, does it even have to be leverage? You could just ask, is it possible that Juwan Johnson gets a touchdown and a few catches and outscores David Moore?
Yeah. Doesn't need to be leverage, actually. Yeah, he's just like, he's playable in a vacuum because the value's like so bad.
Yeah, I'm going to co-sign Tommy Tremble. I'm a Notre Dame fan, Ryan. Tommy Tremble, famous Notre Dame product. More of like a Swiss Army knife type of player. He can kind of line up as H-back and all over, but all you need to do is walk into one of those touchdowns. And Ryan and I are going to be all over stacking Bryce Young at GPPs. So kind of half joking there. I'm only considering it, folks. So don't hold me to that. But I mean, talk about a way that you could play, an Adam Thielen, a Bryce Young, and a Tommy Tremble. Maybe that game goes crazy. Get Mike Evans on the other side, and you can afford a lot of expensive pieces. Whew. Mo was just yelling at me right now, Ryan. Any other names at tight end that you want to mention?
Bryce Young, Thielen, and Trem. Wow, talk about a vomit stack. That's old school right there.
In the 50-cent GPP, Ryan, I'll probably play a couple teams like that.
I love it.
Trying to turn a couple quarters into $5,000.
That's how you do it.
That's how you do it. Or maybe not how you do it, but we'll see. Ryan, let's flip over defense and special teams. Colts are going to look all right against a rookie, Drake May. What's your take on defense overall? I have to admit, I didn't really grind all the sack numbers and all the pressures and all of the line matchups that we might have.
Yeah, there's nothing really that stands out. So you're going to get Colts, like you said. Colts is going to be chalk, but not like Buccaneers chalk was last week. I mean, Colts will be popular against Drake May for 2,800. And if people don't go there in cash games, it's going to be because they go cheaper. And that would be the Jets at 2,500. It's not a spot that like stands out, but Gino passes a lot and takes some sacks, and
taking a lot of sacks and 13 interceptions on the year.
So right, those sacks and interception numbers are why the Jets project the best of the cheap defenses are the ones below the Colts, and then you might get a little bit of weather in that game too. But I think the Patriots are fine too, going against Anthony Richardson, and then even. It looks like the third most popular defense might be the Jaguars, just because they're minimum price. And we've seen CJ Stroud taking sacks and throwing interceptions. So I don't think it's the worst to go all the way down to the Jags if you need it. And spending for anyone above the Colts will be contrarian, I think. For the first time I can remember, I don't see one defense in a smash spot. Of course, okay, the Bucs against Bryce Young, fine. Texans against the Jags, but Trevor Lawrence is back. That's not like a great spot. Will Levis has been playing better against the Commanders. So I mean, I don't know where you're going to look here. That's like, oh, that's so obvious. There really isn't one of those spots. So it's just going to lead to everybody paying down.
One more pay down option I like, Ryan, is the Arizona Cardinals, only 2,400. How often? I mean, Sam Darnold had one stinker game. I don't know if it was 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, but you can see him just have awful games where it completely falls apart. I think it was when the Vikings failed as like chalk. So
yeah, that's a good shout.
When it's a player like Darnold, I don't mind taking a rip on the Cardinals. Not a must, obviously.
Yeah, no, for sure.
And then was there any other defense that stuck out to me? I noticed that the Rams were 2,700 against New Orleans. I guess
that's not
there's
bad.
just going to be a lot of popular one-off plays there. So I'm thinking in terms of making a rule for a 150 set in that mini max, Ryan, that if I don't play any Puka, if I don't play any Cooper Cup, just boost that projection a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, that's good. Saints have been a good target, and Rams actually, they've had some games with some higher sack numbers. They had a couple young up and coming players that have started to make their defense a little better.
Oh yeah, and that's going to be extra gross, Ryan, because I already forgot that Alvin Kamara is going to be chalk in that as well. So the ultimate contrarian play, I guess, maybe a little bit psycho, but I don't know. I can see it.
I mean, yeah, I guess I'm going to mention, I guess Eagles defense is only 2,600 too. I just look, the storylines in recent weeks have been how good the Eagles defense, what a turnaround for the Eagles defense. And you look at their fantasy scores, and they've been doing it in every way possible. So I know it's a matchup against Lamar, but sometimes Lamar gives up big sack numbers. If he runs around, he holds the ball because he avoids so much. So yeah, you could do worse.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the motto of defense special teams. You could do worse overall. Ryan, we just covered quite a lot in an hour. I think we gave the people some good info. Anything else you got to get off your chest before you enjoy your Friday evening?
No, we've seen a lot of slates like this where there's just going to be some massive chalk, and it's annoying, but you just got to fade some of it in tournaments. It does make it easier to make good tournament lineups. Yeah, I don't know. There'll be a lot of low-owned pieces, so find some ones you like and make sure you play them.
Yeah, I think
I just finished. Yeah, you give us your like if you start a lineup with Kamara, Chase Brown, like T. Higgins, David Moore, one of those chalk tight ends, like so many people start with that grouping that like you really have to just thread the needle. And that almost never happens in NFL. It's much, much easier to win when, you fade someone like Kamara and he scores 15, or you fade someone like Chase Brown and he scores 9, or, you fade T. Higgins, you definitely fade Chris Moore. You can't just be playing all that chalk in tournaments. It's never going to work. If you're inclined to do that, only play cash games this week.
Yeah, I think my main takeaway in this plays in hand is that I think the running back chalk is extremely compelling. Keep a thin running back pool. I didn't really feel the need to jump off of it. Even the more tangential plays like Bucky Irving, something I liked. And then there's just so many wide receivers. And sure, T. Higgins is going to be chalk, Ryan, but it's just not a must. It's not a must to play some of these wide receiver chalky options. And you're going to need 30 points from a couple guys, I think, if you're going to want to bank any reasonably sized GPP, even if it's over a couple hundred people. So I'm just going to co-sign. I'm probably going to play chalky running backs. And then, I'm going to click Nico Collins or, quote unquote, gross, but really talented wide receivers who, can just get it done on a crazy NFL Sunday. Yeah, I agree with you overall. Diego in the chat saying thank you. No, thank you, Diego, for listening to us live. The best way to support the program is to become a subscriber to RotoWire, rotowire.com/pod. I mean, Ryan, how many tabs do I have up? I have 10 that we use through this discussion, looking at game logs. We got snap counts. We got targets. We got red zone targets. We have team stats. We have the lineup projections and the optimizers. You can really get lost surfing RotoWire for a couple hours. I mean, I know I certainly use it quite a lot just to learn a little bit more about how these players score points. Otherwise, give us a thumbs up, like us in your podcast feed. A 5-star review always helps. Tell a friend about the show, all of that fun stuff. I'll stop wasting your time. Thank you so much for listening to us, everyone. We'll be back next week, and good luck in week 13, everyone.
Thanks, Jack. Good luck, everybody.